Welcome back to another episode of the Boss Juice podcast. With us today, we have Jim Christiana of M7 Sports, M7 Marketing Agency. Jim, thanks for having us on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. So starting off the show here, I want to talk about your kind of transition into entrepreneurship. So unlike most people where you start in business and you kind of get into politics, you started in politics, then made your transition into business. How was that like for you?
Well, it was a means to deliver change. So I grew up in Beaver County. Western Pennsylvania has been known for generations for the steel industry and the economic development that was here, the jobs that were here. But I was born in 1983, and that was right as the steel industry was leaving. My dad worked in a steel mill. My parents were divorced when I was pretty young. My stepdad worked at a power plant. So I was raised in a very blue-collar family. But for me, all I heard about was the glory days and what it used to be like. And when I was the first kid in my family to go to college, and when I was in college, I was really exposed to the political system. I was a political science major. And what I realized was that the political system is a means to change, to deliver change. And, for somebody that didn't inherit wealth or a whole lot of financial opportunity, I had to create it some other way. And I looked to politics to change the community. And I was watching politicians and studying them, and they would always say they were going to bring back the steel mills. It was like for 20 years, right? Oh, we're going to bring back the steel mills. And what I recognized was that wasn't the solution. The solution was to reinvent ourselves. The steel industry was why a lot of our river towns were falling apart, and our churches were, losing their congregation, our schools were declining. It was because there wasn't an industry that was here, and to be honest, we didn't have a diversified economy, so that when one left or was, became antiquated, another one was picked up. And so that's why we didn't have any population growth or economic growth. So I got into politics truly for all the right reasons, and it was to fix the system that was broken. And it's something that has actually a skill set that I think is translated to my entrepreneur and business success, and that is that if you're sitting around looking at it and we're complaining about it, if we're saying, listen, we don't have enough sports facilities in our community for our kids, I just run right towards it and say, let's put a plan together, let's bring people together, and let's try to solve the problem. And that mindset I discovered, and I think that skill set is what I discovered in politics. So yeah, it's kind of unique. And by the way, I don't necessarily know if my son came to me at 21 and said, hey, I want to be a councilman in our hometown. Dad, do you think I should run? I don't know that I would encourage him to do it. I could understand why. Obviously, I did. That's what I did. And at 25, I ran for the legislature. And at 35, I ran for the U.S. Senate. All because there's a means, it presents an opportunity to deliver change. And I think what I was most proud of in my tenure as a legislature was that I delivered on just about every promise that I made. I brought the biggest investment in Pennsylvania since World War II here in the Shell cracker plant. I brought an approved private school for McGuire, something that hadn't happened in 10 years. Delivered transparency in Harrisburg, showing people where the tax dollars were being spent. So when you look at my record, I was really proud of it. But I think the coolest thing was that I honored my term limit. That's awesome. I left when I said I would, and I went back to the private sector.
Did you find that, in these two different worlds, do you find that the politics world was tougher or the business world was tougher?
The business world is a lot tougher. And I think it's because there's a lot. I think when you have to provide a value to a customer, mm-hmm. and you have to make their life better, and you got to ask for the sale, and you got to overcome the objection, you got to ask for the sale, then you got to meet those expectations. I think it's hard. There's a lot of businesses out there. There's a lot of great, smart entrepreneurs. If you've ever watched the show Billions, oh, yeah. The one takeaway I had from the show Billions was that you had these two alpha males, one in the public sector, one in the private sector. And by and large, when I watch that show, I don't gravitate to wanting to be in the public sector, right? I think the most talent is in the private sector. And And so I think it's easier to succeed in politics. Some would say that's because there's a lower bar. Some would say that the position just is not rewarding enough for the talent to actually want to go there. Some would say the toxicity in this day and age, why would you ever want to get into politics? That's true. So I think it's a lot harder to succeed in the private sector. I think what is one of the problems in our political system right now, and one of the reasons that the public continually gets frustrated with politics, is that because the people that are serving in those offices, it is the best job that they will ever have. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. When public office, when elected office is the best job you'll ever have in your career, that means that you will do anything to keep it. And here's the logical thing. If I have to do anything, if keeping my job is responsibility number one, because this is the best job I'll ever have, therefore I want to keep it, what inevitably happens is there's inaction. Because a politician can talk out of both sides of their mouth, mm-hmm. but they can't vote out of both sides of their mouth. So they can go back and tell both sides of an issue what they want to hear and get rewarded by getting their vote. But the moment they vote, they have to make a choice. They pick this side or this side. That inherently creates a problem because you're going to lose votes, and that's going to put you closer to losing your job, which is the best job you've ever had. So therefore, inaction is the recipe to keeping your job, and that's a problem. That is why the public is inherently frustrated with politicians. It's why it's a dirty word at the dinner table or at the Thanksgiving table. That's why people say don't talk about politics, with your friends or your family. And it's because of that, because the elected officials will do anything to keep their job, which means they can't do anything. That's why the system's broken.
That is actually a very interesting point. I don't think I've ever heard anyone explain it that way. But now that you say that, it's kind of eye-opening because it's true. It's I like your comparison between, business. You have to make the sale, but you also have to you have to come through on that sale and meet their expectations. Whereas in politics, that might not necessarily be the case. That's super interesting to me.
Well, it should be the case, but oftentimes it's not. And oftentimes it's in politics, particularly in a democracy, mm-hmm. a representative form of democracy, I can blame everybody else. I can say that I didn't vote for a bill because it was too hot. And then I can say, well, that bill was too cold. And it was close, but that the Senate, we voted for a bill, but the Senate killed the bill. Like, there's a million excuses why shit doesn't get done in politics.
Right.
But that doesn't matter to the public. But then it comes down to an election is about two people, and you can do enough to get by with inaction, particularly if there's no term limits. So the thing about my self-imposed term limit, what it did, and I didn't know it when I was 24 years old and I was running. And I made my term limit pledge. I didn't even know the benefit of why I said it. I knew that the public wanted it. I believed that it was right. But here was why it ended up, I think, being the best decision, one of the best decisions of my life, is because it created a sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. I had an expiration date. I knew that after 10 years I was leaving, and therefore I was motivated to leave it better than I found it. And therefore I had to find common ground. I did not allow it to go to another session, right? Well, we'll come back and we'll get it next year or next term. What I did was, no, let's compromise. Mm-hmm. Let's find a way to get to 50% plus one, find a way to get it through the Senate, find a way to get it to the governor's desk. And but that's generally not how it works because we don't have term limits.
Sure. And do you think that there's a place, or maybe not a place, but do you think that politics, politicians or government in general does a good enough job to support businesses or entrepreneurs?
Yes, but I also think sometimes they do too much. Mm-hmm. I think if I'm going back to, if we're talking about history and we go back to some generational moments in the 60s and 70s. What I didn't see, but when I look back into history and I see what happened in those eras and what is still happening today is that businesses, particularly big business, utilize the government to expand their market share. And that to me is dangerous. The best thing that Washington can do is to get out of the way, right? Now, it's unrealistic. It sounds great, but people say we live in a free economy. Like my party loves to say we live in a free economy. Like, no, we don't. We live in a regulated economy. And over-regulation not only kills business, but worse than that, it picks winners and losers. Mm-hmm. It allows the big to get bigger, the huge to get enormous, right? And then when you have the resources, you can hire the lobbyists, you can hire the accountants, you can pay off the politicians, you can manipulate the system. You can send your executives in to serve in administrations and the revolving door. Like, it's real. And it starts with the government kind of opening that door and allowing businesses to manipulate the market. And so I don't think that the government can do a whole lot to help businesses. Now, can it provide capital and funding? Yes, right? It can. But again, you've got to be able to navigate the system the moment that the government does that, right? And some programs today are, state programs are based more on merit than they used to be. But ultimately, I think business is going to succeed based on the quality of your product, your customer service. Do you offer a value to people? Competition. I'm a huge believer that the best thing we can do is incentivize competition. And that ultimately is what's going to make our economy stronger.
Right. So taking everything that you learned in politics, and you had a pretty successful long career in politics, how do you transition into M7? Why M7? Why marketing? Why do you make that jump into the business world, and why specifically into the marketing world?
So it's a great question. And all the reasons that I ran towards the dumpster fire of politics was the same reason I started my own company. Because the one thing I did, there's a couple things I loved about being in politics, and the one thing that I really loved about politics was that on any given day, I could be talking about energy policy and learn about hydraulic fracturing. And then the next meeting, it'd be somebody coming in and talk about education policy. And the next meeting come in and talk about healthcare. And the next meeting could be talking about, the budget, the state budget, and economic development, and meeting with entrepreneurs like Chuck Betters and, innovators. That access to a blue-collar kid, Beaver County at 25, was never there. So in many ways, it was like a business degree, a PhD, a law degree, like all in one 10-year sentence. And it was really awesome. So when I was leaving the private sector, I was leaving elected office and going to the private sector, what I wanted to do was to have that diversity of issues and things I was working on. Going in-house at a company wasn't going to be realistic for me.
Right.
I wanted to work on different things. And ultimately, that's why our company works in the energy sector, the education sector, the hospitality sector, the airline industry. Like, we're all over the place building, growth strategies for companies. And that's ultimately what we do. So there's only three things a business needs to grow. You need more customers, you need more capacity, or you need more capital. You got to have one of those three things if you want to grow. Now, granted, not every organization wants to grow. We are the first to say that if you're not growth-oriented and you don't want to, you're not aggressive and you don't want to grow, that you shouldn't work with M7. But if you want to grow and you want to accumulate more market share, you want to be more integrated, and you're hungry to succeed, M7 is a perfect consulting firm for you, because we will inevitably put a solution on the table to help you grow, because we will get you more customers, we'll get you more capacity, or we'll get you more capital depending on what your needs are. And so that's a problem-solving,
Sure.
skill set that me and the team has, and that was how I attacked politics. It was also the last 4 years in politics. I went to law school at night, and I graduated with a law degree, and from Widener, which is a law school in Harrisburg. And what law school helped me do was to identify the issue, find the rule, apply it, and conclude. Issue, rule, application, conclusion. So it wired your brain to really organize and come up with a strategic approach to solving problems or solving issues, and then ultimately making a decision and a conclusion. All things that are really important, whether you're growing your own business or you're helping another business grow, and applying those same strategies in place. So for me, it was really, it was really important for me to have that diversity, to rely on my experience, but I wanted nothing to do with, being a lobbyist.
Sure.
That's the traditional approach, is like, hey, if you got political experience, particularly if you're young and you want to get out of politics, you go be a lobbyist. I didn't want to do that. I had young kids. I wanted to stay back back home, not go to Harrisburg. And to be honest, that's just not the type of work that I wanted to do. So I started, and part of the reason is we started M7, and the name M7 comes from Matthew 7. Specifically, the passage in Matthew 7 that encourages us to seek a narrow path taken by few and avoid the broad path that's taken by most. And so we're encouraged to do that. And to be honest, that's what I've been doing kind of ever since I was in college and ran for office. Was if everybody else was doing it one way, I was wired to try to do it a different way. And to be honest, that what I find out in Matthew 7 is like, that's exactly what we're encouraged to do.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting you bring up your 3 points about every business. I think this is really important for our listeners. You said it was capital, customers, and what was the third one?
Capacity.
Yeah. To grow a business. I think that's really important.
Those are the 3 things. Like nobody will, you can't broaden it, you can't narrow it. If you want to grow, you need more customers, capacity, or capital, cash, right?
And so do you think that a lot of our listeners that are listening to the show, they're younger entrepreneurs. Do you think that age plays a factor in helping them achieve those 3 things?
Where does age fall into it? I think age is really tough. So young entrepreneurs, we're saying, under 30, under 40, to be honest, a young entrepreneur has a tough job. It's not tough because of our generations or your generation, right? It's not a generational problem. In fact, I think we could, if we're competing against our generation, entrepreneurs, you're going to win all day long. If you have vision and execution, you will win. The challenge we have is actually competing against, the older generation, the boomers. I think the boomers that are in decision-making, I think they have a reluctance to embrace youth in the private sector. I'll go back to how politics is different, but the challenge that business owners have is when a boomer is the decision maker, there's a lot of age discrimination, right? And so one of the things that you just have to get over is that objection that you look young, you are young, you don't have experience. You got to turn that into an asset. In any sales process, you have to present your solution. You should imply or tell the problem that you're helping them overcome. But you present your solution, and the next piece is the overcome doubt. You got to overcome doubt. If you're talking to a boomer, likely and you're young, one of the biggest challenges is going to be your age. They may tell you that, they may not, but you've got to overcome that. And then I think the way you overcome it is to turn it as a positive, right? Your youth, your experience is, your inexperience, so to speak, is actually an asset because you have the drive to succeed. That's what I think a lot of young entrepreneurs have to lean into it. Instead of complaining about it, it is what it is, right? Millennials, ironically, when that was the first thing and we were, millennials were in their 20s, we were all lazy. Gen Z, they're all lazy, right? Older generations are always going to say that the next generation is lazy. If they are the decision makers, just figure out a way to overcome that. And if you can't, move on to the next one. And so now, interestingly enough, in politics, it was the opposite. Boomers, particularly and older, have become very frustrated with government, particularly in Western Pennsylvania, in the Rust Belt. They've been lied to for years by their government. They've been way over-promised and under-delivered by elected officials for generations. So when I was running for the state house, even when I was running for a council, I was running against people that were significantly older than me. And most of all of those opponents always thought my age was a liability. Oh, he's too young, he's too young, he's too young. But what they didn't understand was that young to the electorate was that I was fresh, I was untarnished, I was clean. And so they kept hammering this, but they were actually identifying my greatest asset to the voters, which is he's pure in the sense of like he's not been bought, he's not been tarnished, he hasn't lied to me. And to be honest, that's why I think I was rewarded in a very Democratic district. I was a conservative Republican who never watered down what I stood for. I was always honest about what my positions were, and I was always rewarded. And I think it was in many ways because I was young. But to go back to my strategy of being young was being young actually sets low expectations. And if you're prepared, you can overcome those expectations. You get to be 50 years old and an entrepreneur. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have low expectations.
Right.
And this is where I say young entrepreneurs need to embrace that people are beating them up on their young. The good news is young has lower expectations, which means if you know your shit and you're able to build value, ask for the sale, respect people's time, look them in the eye, give a good handshake, and have a reasonable price, and you have the confidence, like do that first contract, no matter what it takes to get it done, then blow them away with your customer service. Blow them away with how good your product is. And then you can make them money on the next one, right? But I think so many times young entrepreneurs just want to beat up on the system and ignore them. The problem is there's a lot of boomers that are in control.
Sure. 100%. I think that the idea of, fresh blood is important. I think being an entrepreneur, one of the big things is being an innovator, innovating, thinking, a different path. And I think, M7, the name that you described, taking, what was it, the
narrow path,
the narrow path is so important to highlight because as entrepreneurs, I think we tend to see things outside of the box. You see, oh, there's a problem. How can I solve this in the market? And I think that's a rare thing, or not a rare thing, but an uncommon way of thinking, and from most people. And so I want to get your thoughts on kind of like the schooling system, because you went to college, you had a degree in political science, and you said you went to law school at night. But do you think that the school system is shaping up kids to think down that narrow path instead of the more broad path?
No, I think the system is set up. The traditional education system, public education system in this country is absolutely taking the broad path approach. They don't take the individual student and put together an education plan for those individual students. But here's also the other problem that I have. That's the way the system is set up. It is set up to teach to the broad and to teach to the masses. But it's also a parent's job, I think, to create that individualized plan and find out what your kids' strengths are, what their weaknesses are. How do they learn? Do they need a standing desk? Do they need a certain type of chair? Are we doing, if my foul shots suck, how do I get better at that? It's coming out and getting more reps and more reps. Are we doing those additional reps with our kids, or are we expecting teachers to do everything?
Right.
I don't, in this day and age, education as a public policy issue is toxic. And there are forces at play that want to put you into this split screen approach, right? You're either in this side or you're this side. School choice, you hate teachers, right? Oh, you hate the public education system. We need to break through that. We need to say, no, I want to support parents' choice. But a lot of times, like for my kids, the best choice for my kids is the public school. Like we love our public school. We chose to live where we did because of the public school. But we also have reasonable expectations that teachers should not be. The expectation is not that teachers will replace the role of me as a dad and my wife as a mom, right? And I think sometimes that's what we expect, is that the education system should teach them everything. Do I think there needs to be educational changes? Yes. Do I think there should be more tangible life skills that they learn, particularly as they get older? Sure. Financial literacy, right? But that's also my job, right? Why can't I teach my son and my daughter the financial literacy piece? Why is the expectation of, oh, by the way, you should do it?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And I 100% agree with you on that, by the way. But so on the topic of school, can we talk a little bit about NIL and NIL deals? Because, you know, I think this is a new industry kind of coming up. I think kids are excited about it. I think entrepreneurs are excited about it. And you've obviously, you know, kind of jumped right into that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the whole NIL?
Yeah, so the cool thing about NIL from my perspective, July 1st, 2021, amateur sports changed forever. Like, it is pre that day, post that day. It will never be the same. And to be honest, by and large, I believe it's a good thing. Change is never easy. Tectonic shifts are definitely never easy, but this is a complicated issue. And so one of the reasons I love the NIL conversation is because it brings together public policy, right? It brings together marketing, and it brings together sports. Three things that I absolutely love talking about and helping people to navigate is the political system and political solutions. NIL is a great case study of why we need government regulations sometimes. And if we don't have government relations, shit gets really messy. And that is because the market is left to figure out NIL right now because we don't have uniform policies in place yet. So that requires businesses to be responsible, and I think the market to create competition, but we really need business leaders to have the best interest of their customers, in this particular situation, it's kids, and put them front and center while we work out the regulations. This is where I think industry leaders have an obligation to more than just the bottom line. And so NIL, the thing that people have to, what I recognized about NIL was that what NIL really is, it's a synonym for influencer marketing. Advertising had already been changing, where advertising now wasn't just billboards and TV commercials. It's sponsored content, it's influencers, it's 30-second clips on somebody's social media that maybe they only have 1,200 followers, but they can really engage that audience. They can sell a lot of products, particularly retail products, impulse products. So the advertising industry was already shifting that way substantially, rapidly. All NIL did was say now that amateur athletes, endorsement deals of, when we think about Michael Jordan, right? He was one of the greatest endorsers of products. That's all NIL really is. Now, there's a subset of NIL, which is kind of pay to play, which is different, right?
Sure.
That's where kids are getting stipends for the most part, right? When I talk, we definitely have to distinguish the two, but the endorsement deal, the influencer marketing, which is something that M7 agency already was working on, helping brands. When the shift happened on July 1, 2021, we were like, hey, listen, this is our opportunity to help athletes do this, high school as well as college, and work on personal brand. So that's the major thing here. If, talking to kids, it's about understanding the importance of personal brand in this day and age. It's what's going to help you get recruited to play in college. It's what's going to get you recruited for your first job out of college. It's what's going to give you a track to get promoted and upward mobility. Understanding the importance of personal brand and the importance of good social media digital habits and digital hygiene is so important. And so this kind of gives me an opportunity to mentor young athletes and our team, again, on how to build a personal brand and how to effectively represent someone else's interest. I say all the time that our dream is to help athletes achieve their dream. That's the focus. And that's truly being an agent.
That's awesome. And so we're sitting in this amazing facility, M7 Sports, as I'm sure our listeners can see from, behind you. But how does this facility play a role in your vision for NIL influencers and sponsorships and such?
So ultimately, we were trying to create content. That's, highlight videos, photography, graphic design, creating content for athletes, helping them maximize their time in sports, particularly to get recruited. And the challenge we were having was to find space, climate-controlled space, in order to create that content. And so what we recognized was that we were complaining about the same thing that thousands of families were complaining, which there was just not enough facility space. There was not enough places in Beaver County, in the airport area, Pittsburgh airport area, for athletes to train, where they can work on their brand, their body, and their mind, right? So working on your mind, body, and brand is what we say that's our forte. That's what we do inside this space. The body piece of it is obvious, right? That's where athletes come work on their skills, work on their physical development, speed, agility, putting all of that in this space. But there's so much more to this building than that. And that is that we help them with build their brand, promote their brand, maximize their brand in order to get recruited, in order to get NIL opportunities. And then the next piece, which is the most important piece, which is the mental health, the mental strength, the mental fitness of being a youth in this day and age. Mm-hmm. And understanding that everybody loves sports. We all want to be athletes for the rest of our lives, but we all have an identity that's beyond being an athlete. So many kids, so much focus is on getting recruited to reduce the cost of education. That's a problem in and of itself, but so much focus is on them as an athlete that when failure comes, mm-hmm. they don't know how to handle it. And like I said, embracing that you're young as an entrepreneur is the same mindset as embracing the loss or the failure in sports. Yes, like that is actually how you grow. Yep. You don't grow when everything's going your way and you're the greatest and you're the best, your best. Eventually it's going to catch up to you. Yep. And you learn so much more from losses. That's why, Jalen Hurts, after the Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs a couple years ago, he said, you win or you learn. And to me, that's like so simple, yet it's so powerful that actually the loss isn't even a loss. Right. It's a massive win for you if you have the right perspective.
Yeah, 110% agree with that. I mean, that is the whole mission of this show, is we like to kind of highlight the rough points or like the failures, and not to say like, oh, that person failed, but because like it's a learning experience. Yeah. And so if you don't mind sharing, like over your career in politics and in business, what have been some of your failures that you've learned from and have helped turn you into a better businessman?
Well, I ran for the United States Senate in 2018. I didn't get 50% plus one. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately in politics, I was, the ultimate competitor. I truly am, but I think I had the wrong perspective for a little while. It took me a long time to realize that I really didn't lose, right? In many ways, I mean, clearly I lost the election. I did not win, but in the whole scheme of life, I built some amazing relationships. I won, 18 counties. I exceeded expectations. And the biggest thing for me was that it led me to M7. It led me to this. Mm-hmm. It was exactly what was supposed to happen. And in the whole scheme of things, I didn't really lose at all. Now, some people would say, like, yeah, but you're not in the United States Senate. True, but, everybody, if you watch people in politics all the time, they say, why did you run? I was called to run. You were probably called to run. I'm not questioning that. But you might not be called to win. Mm-hmm. And that is so often what people think in politics is like, just because you were called to run does not mean you were called to win. And that's not the ultimate win or loss in a campaign. But so that was one quote unquote failure that I think I had to work through. I think there's failures along the way too, that a loss of a client or a prospect, like so often we chalk those up to losses, but every time you do it, it's another rep, it's another learning experience. You sharpen your sword and you come back better than you have. To be honest, I have had wins in the short term that have turned out to be losses. Right. You've won a contract, but in the long term, in the long run, it actually has been a loss. Mm-hmm. And so it happens the other way, where you think you lose in the short term, but in the long term you actually win. It happens the other way, where you think you won, but really, you didn't win anything. You probably set yourself back. I think in my profession, like in my entrepreneurial era of my life, I think the losses are more just about inefficiency, but you learn by doing. You have to go through that process. I'll tell you this: the next 50 sports complexes I build will be a heck of a lot better from a construction management standpoint than this one, right?
Yep.
But you got to build your first.
100%. And it's interesting you bring that up because that's one of the things I was curious about is, we see in your kind of marketing here, it's M7 Sports Pittsburgh.
Right.
So, you have plans for other locations?
Yeah, that was intentional for a number of reasons. Yes, I think if I'm tasked with being the chief vision officer of this company, I'm already looking down the road of where can we build the next one, because I do think what we do inside here is what makes us unique, that we can develop an athlete's mind, body, and brand in a way that nobody else really can. So I think our growth strategy over the next 6 months is to grow this footprint in this facility with a second building and potential other expansions here on the property. But after that, I would say our next growth strategy is where can we do this in other parts of the country in order to help athletes there too. Right.
That's super cool. And I want to talk about, branding, because you've brought up a couple of times about the importance of, the physical and the mind and then the brand of this athlete or the influence or whatever you want to call it. And brand, I feel, is unique to each individual athlete. And so how are you guys kind of taking that? And I think that's important for entrepreneurs too, because whether you want to admit it or not, you start a business, you are creating a brand and you have to live up to that brand. How do you help kids, create those brands? And also, I'm just curious about the fact that kids are young, they might make stupid mistakes. How do you protect that brand?
Yeah, a couple of things. I would push back a little bit that not every company necessarily wants or is a brand. Mm-hmm. I think there's an important distinction about what is a brand, and that is that you can charge a premium, in theory. You can charge a premium over your competitors because of that brand. You may not choose to, but that's the distinction. So if there is a lower cost alternative, yet people are still choosing your product or service, you've established brand and brand equity. And so that's really important. So how do you build that type of brand or brand equity? Because in my opinion, there are a lot of major companies that don't actually have a brand. Mm-hmm. They're selling convenience. They're selling the low-cost solution, and therefore there's no brand loyalty associated with it. And therefore you see why they go out of business within 5 years or something to that effect, right? So first thing is, do you want to be a brand? The second thing is that I can't create a brand for anybody. Marketing companies that say we create brands or we're the brand, the brand doctors or the brand creators, like, no. I think my job is to help reveal what that brand is and scratch it away and get down to helping the client and us discover what that brand is. And that's really important. Some people know. They say, hey, this is my brand value. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is why I do it. This is how we do, this is our competition. This is how we distinguish ourselves from our competition. These are the adjectives we want people to describe our company. And so sometimes that brand, but rarely does that brand exist already. Well, do they know what it is? It exists, but we got to discover it. And so that's where we have visionary sessions or discovery sessions, some people call it, with our clients or our prospects to try to figure that out. Because then that's the guts of what you market. That's the guts of why people invest, or why people come to work for that company. The three things you need, right? You need capacity, capital, or customers. It's a heck of a lot easier to acquire those things if you're a brand.
Okay. And so going off of that, with the individual brands for these athletes, how do you protect those, and how does that work? Because they are young. You're working with kids that are in high school, even maybe younger than that. How do you help them understand that concept of brand?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit easier nowadays because of the digital footprint, and they understand that they are leaving a trail associated with it. But like any company, every 5 years, 3 years, you should do a brand audit and a true assessment of where your brand stacks up compared to your competitors. See, these are a lot of the same elements that we do and have been doing with companies,
Sure.
but we apply it to the individual and the person, and letting them see that their actions and their decisions have consequences on that brand, good and bad, and ultimately doing an assessment of where they want to go is really important. So for a 14, 15-year-old athlete, that brand might be, I love animals, I love to read, I can bench press 150% of my body weight, I run a fast 40, or I grind out every morning at 7:30 or 6:30 in the morning before I go to school. I make 50 foul shots in my backyard, or me and my dad come down to M7 Sports every night from 6:30 to 7:30, even if I have practice, to get extra reps in. So that brand might be their athletic, tangible talents, or it might be their intrinsic talents and skill sets and it's likely some combination thereof. But then it's going to change when they become an adult. It's, or they go to college, or they start to see the rest of the world. At that point, pause. What do you want that brand to be? And let's make sure that we're building a footprint for that brand. And then the last piece, and you're continually doing. That's why it's so important for me that when somebody is represented by M7, we're staying with them for as long as possible until that first job, or they leave their mark on what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Right. And so when was your first signing of an athlete? Was it on that July 1st of 2021, you said? Or was it after that, before that?
It was.
And how many clients do you guys support in this kind of influencer marketing?
Oh, it's I've actually probably lost track because now we're, our growth strategy is about building capacity and additional agents. And also this facility really became the focus. Like, we recognized that the athlete representation with a facility like this would exponentially change.
Sure.
And so our growth strategy went from more athletes to getting this place operational, and then in 2025 really put our foot on the gas. But our first athlete actually now, it was Maria Miosic. I think it was pretty soon after the July 1st, 2021 decision by the Supreme Court. She turned out to be our first hire at M7 Sports, and is still with the company today.
That's cool. That's very, very cool. That's so, and I mean, and that just goes to show that you stick to your word, where you stick with them until that until that first job.
Right. And Maria was a marketing major and had no idea when she was our first athlete that she would also intern, and then she would be a rock star, and then she'd become our first employee at M7 Sports.
Very cool. Very cool. Is there a way you pick your athletes? Is there like a weed out process, or is it just like anyone can come to you? How does that work?
No, it's definitely it's a marriage to a certain extent. I mean, it has to do with their intangibles, and are they motivated? Is this their agenda, or are they being convinced to play at the next level? All of our athletes have to have, a desire to play, like truly are passionate about playing at the next level. Because if not, then they're just wasting their time, money, and our time, to be honest. It's just not a healthy fit. Like, we are going to, again, if you don't have that growth mindset, if we're your agents and representatives, we're going to underperform for you, because our job is to help you get to yours. And if you don't have that vision, we can't help you execute it.
Sure.
We can't subsidize your vision. So that's the first thing, is that they got to have the vision. I think the next piece is that we have to be realistic about what it is that their vision is, and whether or not we can help them get there. So much of this is about setting reasonable expectations for kids. Mm-hmm. And if the kid has unreasonable expectations and doesn't really have the desire and the passion to get to those unreasonable expectations, it's going to be really hard for us to succeed on their behalf, right? So you got to have reasonable expectations. And the easiest to that is if you don't have work, if your work ethic is
Mm-hmm.
but you have a desire to play Division I and have a full scholarship, and you're undersized and you don't have the work ethic, it's going to be hard for us to get you there. But if you want to play at the next level and you have the drive and the commitment, and we think that there's a reasonable chance that we can get there, we're gonna partner with you.
And what is the business model behind that, if you don't mind me asking? Do these athletes pay you, or is it like a traditional kind of agency like a athlete agent agreement where you kind of get a piece of their earnings? How does
Great
that work?
question. So the simple answer is that the parents are who contract with us to manage the recruitment process and the brand management. So, parent says, I want to, we need your help managing the recruitment process. There's a lot of reasons why we think that's a great thing for parents. And the biggest is because it eliminates the stress. It puts mom and dad and son or daughter on the same side of the table,
Yep.
as opposed to how this is typically run and managed. Mom or dad sitting on the opposite side of the table, forcing junior in order to reply to the coaches, do the visits. It's really stressful. The moment we come in, we right size it. You're back to being mom or dad, supporting your son or daughter's dreams and goals, and we're helping to manage the process. If there needs to be a bad guy in the room, that's going to be us, right? If there's a deadline looming, we're going to be the one pushing it. And then it ultimately sets the right structure in place. So the parents contract with us, and then we stay with the child all the way through college if they want. There's no exclusivity. So if they get to college and their NIL collective wants to have a deal with them, we review it, we help them through it. It's really an extension of the relationship we started in the high school level. 100% of the NIL deals go to our clients. We don't take any percentage of an NIL deal because, in our opinion, that money should be reserved for the athlete.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a service that we are providing, we're helping them to create content that is to benefit a brand. That brand is who should pay us.
Gotcha.
And if the athlete is so talented that they don't even need us, they're able to create content in their bedroom, and they're doing great social media content, and they're moving their audience to, ultimately to support the brands that are paying them. We didn't provide any value. We shouldn't be compensated for that. So if we're providing a value, we're helping create content, the brand should pay us. Anything in the NIL deal goes to the athlete. And we don't believe in exclusivity agreements. We think again, even though there's not a regulation saying that you shouldn't have exclusivity agreements, I believe it's the right thing for us to do. Like you should allow these kids to go where the opportunity presents themselves. If there's an organization or a company out there that is willing to pay them for their NIL opportunities, allow them, the market, to reward those kids. And exclusivity agreements, in my opinion, have no place.
Yep. Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. And so, speaking of regulations, though, do you see this kind of industry being more regulated, or do you see? Because right now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of just the Wild West.
It is as close to a free market as you can have, right? The NCAA says that, me as an NFL agent, I can't leverage college representation on professional representation. That's like the only rule in place. Some states have said, hey, you can't do, gambling, or you can't do liquor or cigarettes, tobacco, those types of things. But for the most part, it is the wild, wild west. Because when you leave it to the states, what some states have seen is that if they put regulations in place, they're hurting their in-state institutions. And they're like, whoa, we don't want to do that. We want our in-state institutions to compete and to win. So they have actually created wars with the NCAA to help their schools. So the states aren't going to regulate this now because regulations creates a competitive disadvantage. If you're Syracuse in New York, and the state of New York puts regulations on Syracuse to make it harder to do NIL, well, that only helps the schools in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, the LSUs of the world, the SECs. So I don't think you'll see a lot of state regulations. So what's that mean? Congress. And if you're asking me, do I think Congress will do the right thing and put reasonable regulations in place, that protect the consumer, kids, yet allow commerce to take place, I'm skeptical. So what ultimately we need is we need the market to regulate itself. We need parents and athletes to go with reputable companies that give them the most freedom and empower them. And those bad actors that are out there that are just gangsters that are just trying to take advantage of people, we got to expose them and don't give them business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to point out that, you kind of brought this up about protecting the kids, because I think that's like, especially at the young age. I mean, my friends and I talk about this all the time, where some of these kids are like, I always say, if I was 18 or 19 years old and I just got this NIL deal and I'm like, I got all this money, I don't know what I am doing.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do with it? Like, it's a huge problem.
Sure. I mean, you think about that as it's a difficult transition enough going to college, right? First time in your life, you probably haven't had a curfew. You're away from your parents. You got, all the temptations. Your brain isn't done developing. You're still a child in many ways. Now you got a pocket full of cash on top of it. Like, yes, like we should be aware that this is a situation that requires the best, to help and guide and aid these kids. And this is why, though, I'm going to blame the boomers here. A lot of boomers' impulse and instinct is to say, oh, NIL's bad. Nah, we shouldn't have it. We should have money in sports. Like, first of all, it's been a big business. Coaches are making millions of dollars. Schools are making tens of millions of dollars, like billions of dollars. Like, why shouldn't these kids be rewarded, particularly for endorsement deals where they're using their social media platform? Like, literally, the Supreme Court said, you can't take that away. So no matter if you want this or you don't, it's here. So let's put the best system in place. Let's kind of come together as an industry and say, hey, let's expose people that have exclusive. Let's expose the bad actors. Let's reward the good, those that do good. Let's fight for industry standards that protect the kids. Because yes, like, there is a consequence for doing this wrong. Kids will get taken advantage of. And they'll be forced to make, they'll make bad decisions that have consequences. And, those can be prevented.
Is there so when you're saying these are regulated on a state-by-state basis, is there a state?
They could be.
They could be, okay.
Yeah.
Is there a state that you would right now, like, not do business in because it's a mess?
No, I wouldn't say. I think the states that refuse to embrace this, I think are short-sighted.
Okay.
That's the biggest thing, is that they're not allowing their kids to benefit from it out of, I'll say, extreme caution, but I don't even think it's extreme cautiousness. I think it's pure laziness. They don't learn the issue. They don't understand why NIL is here to stay, why it's actually a good thing. I think it's extreme laziness and short-sighted. Kids in those states are not getting to fully capitalize on the opportunity. But I think most of the states are going to stay out of it, which is going to be left to those in the industry to fix it. It's going to be left to the media and media in the traditional and non-traditional sense to continue to have this conversation about who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, and ultimately creating a conversation about it.
Are there other companies kind of competing in this space with you? Because I feel like you're the only company, in all honesty, that I know that is doing this type of thing. I feel like you're very unique in what you're doing.
I'll tell you this, that, we were talking to, we were meeting with Virginia Tech. We had an athlete that was going to Virginia Tech, and they were asking us about our model. We explained this, and they said, you are the only company that takes that approach. Everybody else takes the traditional approach, the broad path. And in many ways, it was a compliment.
Sure.
And, looking back now, a couple years later, it was, I stand by it. It was the right thing. Making money in business is a byproduct of doing the right thing. Similarly, in an election, getting votes is a byproduct of doing the right thing. I think so many times people make it transactional. Like, oh, the goal is I need 50% plus one votes. How can I accumulate those, as opposed to how can I do the right thing and hopefully that gets enough votes to win. Similar in business, people are like, how can I make money, and then try to figure out what the right thing is, as opposed to how can I build value and do the best thing for my clients and then be compensated for that. I think it's a mindset shift that is rare. Unfortunately, I think it is rare.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I just want to highlight again, I really like your, the path. Was it less taken or not?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think that is so powerful for entrepreneurs. And so on
it's
that,
the life they chose. As an entrepreneur, you literally said, I don't want to do what everybody else does.
right.
And that's really challenging. And there's a difference. I think there's an important distinction between being an entrepreneur and being self-employed and being a business owner, right? Obviously, one can lead to the other, but just because you're self-employed or a business owner doesn't mean that you're an entrepreneur.
Sure.
I think an entrepreneur implies that you are going to be more than an individual self-employed or business owner, which you can do by yourself. An entrepreneur is a leader, and an elected official has the potential to be a leader, and those leadership qualities are really important. But if you're an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur, even if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, but you haven't gotten there yet, what you're basically saying is, I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to have a vision, and I'm going to help execute it. And that responsibility is to put yourself last. And that's taking the narrow path, in my opinion. Everybody else is allowed to be selfish and to look out for themselves first. But if you're an entrepreneur, that shouldn't be your mindset.
Do you think that new businesses or entrepreneurs will kind of jump into this industry? I mean, what you're doing is very unique and innovative, but are there other aspects of this industry, or I guess this whole new NIL space, that entrepreneurs or businesses you think are going to jump into?
I think they're actually going, now that the shininess is starting to wear off, and the market is somewhat starting to settle. We're recognizing there's two types of NIL deals. There's those that are just getting a stipend. It's just kind of pay to play. Then there are those that have to have value and skill sets in order to ultimately sell products on their social platforms. I think that's hard work, and most people, they want to be overpaid and underworked, right? I think that's the goal for everybody in life, is that we ultimately want to make as much money as possible, and we want to work the least amount to get it. That's why we play the lottery. The difference is, I think entrepreneurs, and there's a unique people that are just love the grind. So I think when the work starts to get hard, and it's not fast cash, that it's people are going to move on from it and give up on it. And the good news is we're not doing either of those, right? But I also think that sports has a way of attracting people, and if there's a lot of money in sports, or a lot of potential, that will continue to get people's interest. What I'll say about an entrepreneur, this is the mistake that I don't think one of the mistakes I made, and I follow a lot of great people and influencers and business coaches, and there's a lot to be said about buying a business, an existing business, as opposed to starting a business. Now, did that business, that's an important distinction, I think, for entrepreneurs, is that there might be a business that you can buy, not for a whole lot of money even, that is existing. I think that's as opposed to starting it, right? Because, starting it's tough.
Yeah.
But that is, I think, something that is worth looking into, that if you're that entrepreneur and you're getting started, do the business model for a startup, but then look at existing businesses that are in your area that might be for sale, or businesses that might want to expand and that you provide the capacity to scale. So let's say somebody's interested in NIL and they're interested in recruitment marketing. They're like, man, that M7 Sports is really cool. I'm going to go create mine. Why? You could provide the capacity that this company needs in order to grow and expand. And you're just as much an entrepreneur as I am, right? Sure. Those are ways that the entrepreneurial spirit can be rewarded without starting it up from the ground. Because to be honest, I want, selfishly as a competitor, I want that person to go start it up because, man, it's really hard, right? Like, I'll see you in 5 years, and I won't be looking in the rearview mirror. I'll wait to see if you pass me, but that's pretty tough. As opposed to it, with the right mindset, you're like, hey, listen, I'm going to be the capacity to help M7 grow.
Definitely. So speaking of, capacity, what is you talked a lot today about vision. What is your vision for M7 Sports over the next 5-10 years?
I'm definitely one that does not. I have one of the things that I have failed in life at is that there was a point in my early career, in my mid-20s, late 20s, where I would have been able to answer that question, and I would have reverse engineered back from 10 years and told you how I was going to get to that predetermined outcome that I wanted. I think that's, well, first of all, I think personally it was a sin for me to think that I had that much control, and ultimately I want to follow the Lord's plan, and he'll take me where I want to go. And so I'm a big believer in 6-month, 12-month plans and then reassess every 6 or 12 months. So I'm definitely not someone that's going to give you a 10-year plan, but what would my vision is? My vision would be to build additional M7 sports complexes and to expand M7 Enterprises, which includes agency, shop, which is our merchandise company, and sports. I want to acquire talent and expand our C-suite in order to do two things. I want M7 to run without me and to grow without me. And the reason for that is I think that's the definition of becoming an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. When your business can operate without you and grow without you, dude, that's the goal. Because then it gives you the ability to keep pushing the envelope, not to retire, right? It's that I can now focus all of my attention on growing the company as opposed to being in the company. That's really hard to do. Most people can't answer those two questions. Can your business run without you? Can it grow without you? No, but that's where I want to go, which means I've got to retain and develop more talent, which is something I'm really passionate about. I hire predominantly based on the intangible test. I remember I had somebody one time who came to work for me when I was for my campaign, and they said, listen, Jim, I don't know politics. And I said, good, I do. You know marketing. I need you to market this campaign like you would a brand. And that's kind of how I've hired people, is like, even if you don't know how to run a sports complex, do you know operations? Do you treat people the right way? Do you have a vision and a growth agenda? Are you loyal? Are you dedicated? Those kind of things. We all have to learn new skill sets, and actually I think that's really healthy.
Sure.
But I'd say that's what our growth strategy is bringing in more talent that can help us run and grow the business without me, so that I can continue to force the envelope and grow us in other locations.
Is the tangible test, is that an actual test, or you just mean you look at intangible?
Intangible test. Intangible. Right? That's my test. My test is that the intangibles of a human, rather than the tangible skill sets, is actually more important than the tangible skill set.
Gotcha.
You can be the best salesperson and have the best salesperson skills, but if you're not dependable and you're not loyal and you are selfish, and those are things that if you're not a good team player, then you're probably not going to work at M7, sure, even if you are a superior talent from a tangible standpoint.
Gotcha. Very cool.
But those that want to develop talent, the entrepreneurs, are like, hey, listen, I'm not one that's going to, that's how I would prefer to hire. It's not for everybody, because eventually you can, if you're building Thomas Tall can bring in, he builds a sports complex. He can hire somebody that's got 50 years or 30 years or 20 years experience of running the biggest and the best sports complexes in the country. Yes, that is true. That's how some people hire. It's just not the way I have hired.
Right.
And the reason being is that I want to enjoy the work that I do, the people I work with, and the culture. And the reason is that there's only 168 hours in a week, and I don't really want to go to work and I'm not excited to go to work if there's an energy vampire in the room.
Yeah.
I'm not a water cooler kind of guy, but I do genuinely want to care and love for the people that I work with. Can't do that if you're just focused on the bottom line.
No, culture is very, very important. I think that's a reason why a lot of people stay in companies is because of culture.
During the Great Resignation, I had heard a statistic where for Gen Z, they would have on average, I think it's like 18 employers in their career. I have a handful of Gen Zers that work in my company. Every one of them has been with us since their first job out of college. And those that haven't have been there for almost 5 years. And the coolest thing is that they love being at work. And they're the future of the company. Like, they're going to be partners, they're directors, they're going to be senior vice presidents. Ultimately, they're going to own the company, right? Sure. And run it. And that's the coolest part. And I think you're right. The statistics show that upward mobility and empowerment is one of the biggest reasons why people leave.
100%. Jim, we've talked a lot about different things, your story, politics, business, NIL deals. But before we wrap up the show, we always ask our guests one final question. Yeah. And that question is, if you can give a young entrepreneur or someone who wanted to start a business one word of advice, what would that be?
I'd give them two: vision, execution. Be able to articulate your vision and just go start executing it. Don't get paralyzed by decisions or thoughts. You don't have to be reckless, but just start executing. The first step is to write a plan. Great. You got to write a plan. That's execution number one. But just get started executing. But you got to have a vision in where you want to go, and then just keep executing.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Jim, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
You got it.